Well, hello. This is Gurpreet Singh, and I'm delighted to welcome you back to our first webinar from Ethical Reading of 2020. And speaking today is going to be Dr. Charlotte Newey from the University of Reading. And the topic is corporate. It's around charity, actually. Is it more of a corporate or is it an individual concern? And what are the issues relating to both? And really looking forward to this one. But as usual, just a quick run through of Ethical Reading. We are a fairly new not-for-profit social enterprise. We started in January of 2018. Our goal and mission is to embed ethics into the way we live and work in Reading. And we hope to do that by inspiring people and organisations through interesting events and speakers. We want to provide some education and training because we believe everyone can become better at making ethical decisions. And we also want to collaborate with organisations and individuals to achieve our aims, because working together we can achieve a lot more. We currently have over 40 partners and supporters, and it's growing all the time. We want to develop this community of organisations so that Reading is recognised as an area where business is done ethically, and people want to move here and stay here and work for organisations here. We have over 2,500 individual members and followers. And we hope you join as well. Everything we do is done by volunteers. We don't have any full-time staff at the moment, so everyone gives their time for free. And we hope Reading is the start of something bigger, or something we call the Ethical Cities Movement. So we're trying to create a template, if you will, in Reading, and then provide that to other cities around the world. And we have interest from a number of cities, actually Melbourne in Australia, Oxford here, and Omaha in the US. So we intend to go global. We do a whole bunch of things. We'd love to see you at some of these events. Most of the things we do are free of charge. So top left-hand corner is relates to our meetups, and we have a whole bunch of different meetups. We've got one coming up later this month. Please go to our website. You'll see the URL at the bottom of every slide. And if you go to events, you can just register for any of those events, such as meetups, breakfast seminars, and so on. We've created a code of ethics. If you don't have one inside your organisation, you can download it and use it. We've got some training developed, and we do a whole bunch of other things as well as these lunchtime webinars. So now I'm going to hand over to Charlotte, who will take it from here.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much, Gurpreet, and welcome to everyone for this talk. So just before I get started, there's a couple of things I'd like to say, and the first is that I'm not a tax accountant. So one thing I'm not going to be discussing at all are tax benefits to do with corporate philanthropy or individual philanthropy. And the second is I'm a lecturer in the philosophy department at the University of Reading, but I'm not about to give you a philosophy lecture. That said, I think that it is inevitable that the way that I think about things is informed by how I think about values in my day job. And so that's what I'm hoping to bring to our talk today. Okay, so let's just have a little overview of what's in store. I'll talk very briefly about methods of giving. And then I'll move on to a longer discussion really about our motives, why it is that we support the causes that we do. That raises an interesting question, and that question is whether or not motives matter. So I'll discuss that too. And then I shall talk about some potential benefits, and I think there are a few pitfalls, some things to be wary of in terms of corporate giving. And after that, I'll talk about individual philanthropy too. And then I'll just wrap up with a few final thoughts. Okay, so let's get going. When I give this talk, in my head, what I've been thinking about is donations of money and ways in which we can donate our time. So ideas behind community engagement, for example. Of course, there are other things that we can do, but I'm just keeping it simple in terms of this talk so that you'll hear me refer to, giving money or giving time, giving our effort. So that's what I'm thinking about here. Okay, so motives. Why might we give money to a charity? As I say, I'm not going to talk about tax breaks, but you can get advice on that, I'm sure. The first thing seems to me to be that you have a genuine philanthropic concern about some cause. So there might just be something that you want to support, you want to do good in the world, and that seems to be one of the main reasons why people do give money to charity or volunteer or give goods, for example. A second, and I think this is connected actually to the philanthropic concern, but it's slightly different. Well, we're talking about ethical reading, so I'm assuming that the people who are listening to me might well be local businesses. And there's something about being a local business that comes from the idea that some of your success will depend upon your local community. And if you feel that you've been well supported by your own local community, there might be something about your giving behaviours which are to do with giving back to that same community. And then a further concern might just be corporate reputation. So it might be that you have a good reputation because you're a great business. And that might be the main reason why you have a good reputation, but that you feel it could be enhanced by showing that you have certain philanthropic concerns, that you're willing to support either your community or wider reaching causes. So those are three motives. And then I just picked out this quote from the Dalai Lama, who seems to take a particular view on what sort of motives we ought to have. So he says this back in 1999. If we give with the underlying motive of inflating the image others have of us, we defile the act. In this instance, what we're practicing is not generosity, but self-aggrandizement. So is that true? Is that true, and does it matter? I think that's an interesting question. So that's what I'd like to just talk about now, is the idea that maybe motives matter, maybe they don't. Actually, the philosophic views on this are divided. So let's just take a look at both sides of the coin, shall we? Okay, so on the one hand, people might say something like this. Doesn't matter why you're giving money to charity. It doesn't matter why you're volunteering. Other things are really what counts. So this follows a kind of philosophic view that really what matters in the world, or what matters morally, for example, is that you're bringing about more good. You're reducing pain and unhappiness. You're creating happiness. And really those are the things that matter morally. And actually, depending on what we do, we can have enormous effects. So presumably, for example, if we give money or if we give time or effort to people who have the very least in society, we can have maximum impact. So if we're doing something, for example, that alleviates poverty, or if we're doing something that supports the homeless community and helps them perhaps fight for their rights or get fed, all of those things are things which would have an enormous impact. So it might be somebody says, it doesn't matter why you do it, but if you do it in this way, you're going to have an enormous impact. Going back to the previous slide, one of the things I said is that you might feel that you've benefited from support within your community. And one aspect of giving back might also be the fact that your giving is something that improves that community that supports you. So that could be a very valid motive too. And finally, as I say, it might be something to do with building the right reputation, that you strengthen your reputation. So you don't only rely on the business side of things, but you also show that what you're doing also has a concern that goes beyond the bottom line. Okay, so those are people who might say other things matter. Some people might say that what matters when we give, particularly if we give money, is that we are effective in what we do. I'm going to mention that again when we come on to talking about individual giving. And the reason I've put a little question mark there, a heads up, is I'm a little bit sceptical about that view. So, okay, there's the people who think that maybe it doesn't matter what your motive is. But some people would say, actually, it does matter. You can't do a truly good thing if you're doing it for the wrong reason. That's that kind of idea that we got from the Dalai Lama before. And it's also quite a Kantian view. So some people think that what really matters when we're giving money is our intention. So what matters is that when we're doing good, we're doing it for the right reasons and we're doing it for its own sake. So those people would want some kind of particularly clean, altruistic motive, very pure, I guess. So I asked myself a question when I was thinking about this, and my question was this: would a charity mind? Would a charity mind what your motive is if it's benefiting from, say, a check or from your volunteering? And I kind of think that maybe if they get money and they know that you did it from a purely altruistic motive, or they knew that you were doing it to boost your company reputation, ultimately the money does what the money does. So it might be that they don't care very much. And then I had a second thought, which is, well, should they care at all? And I think there's one sense in which they should, and that's that many charities thrive better if they have a regular income stream. So for those charities, one of the things that can really help them to succeed will be sort of consistent giving and reliable behaviour. And that is important because research shows that if there's an economic downturn, the first giving to fall off is corporate giving. And that when there's an upturn, the last giving to come back into play is corporate giving. So I was thinking about this, and my thought is that maybe we don't have to have a strict black and white on the yes-no answer here, but that it might be that your motives are something to do with improving your community or building the right reputation, but that if at least part of the motive comes from intent, at least part of the motive is altruistic, I have a suspicion that that would be something that would help to underpin more consistency and more reliable behaviour. So I'm hoping to sort of dissolve the tension between it having to be one thing or the other there. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the potential benefits of giving money to charity. So one might be, let's ignore tax benefits, one might be doing good in the world. So I don't necessarily mean just the feel-good feeling that you get, but that good gets done. And a second might be corporate profile. So let's have a look at ways in which your corporate profile could be improved. So one thing might be something like social media opportunities and positive media coverage. And something I'd like to mention in that connection is the Ethical Reading and Thames Lido have got together to plant trees, and that's produced a lot of opportunities for people to tweet about it. It's on LinkedIn, it's on our local press pages. I think there's been some radio coverage as well. So these are all opportunities for people to talk about what they're doing. So in terms of profile, it helps you to raise profile. And as more people come on board with a venture, that means that each person's social media profile is kind of benefiting more than just themselves, but also the other people within that group. So it does have some really interesting benefits from a profile perspective. And another thing is this: I've talked a lot about the idea that local businesses are likely to be supported by their local communities. And I think that when people within a community see some commitment back towards the community from those businesses, that just strengthens those ties. And you know, it's a very competitive world out there, and it's easy to get things online and cheap. But if you have stronger ties with your community, I think that helps to protect against that. It helps with your profile as well. Then finally, I work with young people, and quite a lot of my students have expressed an interest in things like working either in ethics, in a business, or working for businesses that have social consciences. And I think that those aspects of your own business can be something that can be a very positive tool when it comes to recruitment. So those are all some interesting benefits in terms of corporate giving. I don't think it's entirely positive though, so I'm just going to raise a couple of potential objections here. So here are maybe some pitfalls to look out for. So the first, actually I'm going to put the first two up together. So dating back to the 1970s, there was an objection that came from an economist Milton Friedman, and his beef with corporate giving was twofold. So one point was, he was saying, when a company gives money to a charity, for example, to a social concern, well, that money's coming from somebody else. Potentially it's coming from the shareholders, if there are any. There may not be shareholders, but if it's not coming from them, it could be coming from employees who might say, well, if you weren't giving this money to charity, I could be paid more. Or it could be coming from customers who might say, if the money wasn't going to charity, I could be getting this good at a cheaper price. So that was one thing that he had to say. So the idea was, really your responsibility is not to go out doing charitable deeds, but rather to be maximising the bottom line. I think there's a fairly easy answer to that, which is that, again, research shows that some corporate social responsibility is often very good as a management tool as well. So it can be good for the bottom line. We've just talked about how it might improve or help you to maintain a good corporate reputation. And I think you might be persuaded by that. So if the evidence were to show that that's good for the bottom line, then that's less of a concern. The second concern is an interesting one, and it's that maybe we don't have the right expertise. So maybe somebody who's a business manager and spending their time managing a business doesn't actually have the appropriate expertise to decide where money ought to go. And I've got some thoughts on that, and I'm going to come on to it in the next slide, but I have some ideas about how we might overcome that as a concern. So another thing to be wary of is publicity and politics. So Reading people, I think you might be aware of this. So the fast food company Chick-fil-A was founded in the States, in Georgia in the 40s, hugely successful in the United States, and it came to launch its first UK branch in the Oracle in Reading. And it was found out that the management of Chick-fil-A supported over $1 million worth of contributions to anti-LGBTQ organisations. Now, I confess I wouldn't have known anything about that if it hadn't been for the fact that I think it was during Pride Week, there were protests outside Chick-fil-A explaining and identifying, highlighting the company's attitude towards the LGBTQ community. And of course there was a backlash. So the Oracle announced very quickly that it wouldn't be renewing the lease, and the business closed. So it was very important to be aware of what you're giving to, and to have a think about the potential not only for positive publicity, but also for negative publicity and the political issues that surround that. Okay, and then I just want to have a word about trends. So obviously it's in a business's interests to follow trends, to know what trends are up and coming, and where that applies to your business, to ensure that your products, for example, or the services that you provide are on trend. So it would make sense ordinarily for a business to be paying particular attention to what is popular and what is trendy and what is the hot topic of the day. But I also want to say that I think that following a trend when it comes to something like charitable giving can have an air of, what's the right word? Well, I picked out the idea of greenwashing. We've had pinkwashing. There's a sort of a lack of authenticity about what you're doing. That may or not be true. So if you take sustainability, as I was talking to Gurpreet earlier about, it is a hot topic at the moment, but it's also something that a lot of people feel very genuinely concerned about. So I think what you have to be able to do is demonstrate that you aren't following a trend for the sake of it. But if what you're doing from a corporate philanthropic perspective happens to be on trend, you also need to show that it's something that you supported anyway, or would have supported anyway. And that kind of brings me on to my next topic, which is authenticity. So my idea is that being authentic in what you're doing is something that will help to protect you from potential backlash and from potential damage to reputation. So ask yourself this question: why is your business supporting a particular cause? what is it about that cause that's relevant to you? Is it that it's just on trend, or is there something that is more authentic than that? So it might be, for example, that you have a personal connection. Perhaps you've been touched by some particular thing and you want to support a cause that's perhaps been good for you. Maybe it's relevant to one of your employees' personal circumstances, and that's something that you wish to support as an employer. You wish to show some support to your staff by supporting that charity or cause. This is something that I think is a really great idea. So I'm just going to give you an example of Schroders, who have been supporting the charities that their employees vote for. So they came up with a theme, and their theme was improving their futures. And then they gave employees various different, asked employees to suggest various different charities that might be good for the theme of improving our futures. And then they picked things like the Social Mobility Foundation. That's a foundation that uses mentoring to help kids from worse backgrounds get a good education, get into good university places and good jobs. And they do things like mental health support. So things that employees are committed to. And also, like Microsoft does locally, they match donations. So those are things in which you are helping your employees to have an enormous amount of impact. And you're also strengthening your relationships with your employees by encouraging them to be the people who suggest what should be supported by your company. I think that shows that you're not merely supporting a trend, and that you're not merely doing this just for the sake of a good reputation, for example. When you do things that are local to your business as well, you're also, I think you're also very much more protected in terms of potential backlash, because it's very understandable why a local business would want to support its local community and have that involvement. And another thing to do with authenticity, I think, is to show when something lines up with your own business goals and your own values. So it might be that a university supports something that's to do with education, or it might be that an IT company supports something that's to do with, for example, going into schools and providing safeguarding training online, something like that. And there is the answer to that criticism that I raised on the previous slide about expertise. I think that as a community of businesses, we have an enormous amount of expertise, an enormous amount of diversity in that expertise. And that gives us a huge opportunity actually to bring that expertise out into local and wider reaching communities and do some good specifically because we have that expertise. So I think that's a very good answer to that potential objection. I've suggested that merely being trendy is probably not the right way to go about choosing the causes that you support. And I just want to raise one final thing, which is another thing you might look at doing is compensating. So if we think back to sustainability, you might think, well, if I have a business which is, carbon emitting business, and maybe I could do something that could offset. So I think that I put a question mark by this one. I think that this is a tricky topic. And the reason I think it's a tricky topic is because of just how fast moving and transparent and connected all of our social media is right now, that what can seem to be a good idea can also come back and bite you. And so as my example, it's not a business, but it's a good example, I think, is Lewis Hamilton. So Lewis Hamilton, obviously his lifestyle involves flying around the world and racing sports cars, and clearly that's a very carbon damaging thing to do. So high carbon emissions in terms of his lifestyle. But on the flip side, Lewis Hamilton is vegan, and he says, go vegan. It's the only way to truly save our planet today. It can be done so quickly. All you have to do is put your mind to it. So that seems good, right? So, okay, he's got a lifestyle that's high in terms of carbon emissions, but he's also then done something that's much lower in terms of carbon emissions. And And so some of the publicity surrounding that is positive. Look, Lewis Hamilton's bringing veganism to the masses, and he has a vegan restaurant as well. So that could be encouraging more people to try vegan meals, for example. So that could be good. But the flip side is potentially charges of being a hypocrite. So Plant-Based News just raised this as a story. In fact, their story was much more balanced than the headline might suggest. So it was, it might seem hypocritical to promote veganism and also compete in F1. But they pointed out he got rid of his private jet, and they said, well, better to be an F1 driver who's vegan than to be an F1 driver who's not vegan. But ultimately it took its toll on Hamilton. So I think the warning there is to say, if you're doing something that somebody could potentially point the finger at, and simultaneously promoting your commitment to the opposite, you should just expect that there's a potential for backlash there. I don't think it's a very smooth journey as such. Particularly how people are on social media. They do love to point the finger and they do love to bring people down. It's a sad fact of our lives. Okay, I just want to say a few things about individual giving. So there's a whole host of different ways that individuals can support charities with money or giving to food banks, with our behaviours, perhaps with volunteering. And one question might be, where should we direct our donations and our energy? And my thought there is that we could either look at our favourite causes, or we could look at supporting the most effective charities. And for corporates, I talked about local businesses potentially supporting local causes in their local community. And I just want to talk about one pressure, which is the idea that maybe what we ought to be doing is getting the most bang for our charity buck. We ought to be putting our money where it's going to do the absolute most good. So this idea comes from meta charities, one such as Effective Altruism. They do research. The research is into what other charities do with the money that they get, what kind of charges they raise, what kind of costs they incur, what kind of good that they do. And I think that it's good that there are these meta charities out there, because some people perhaps will want to follow exactly that kind of effective route. But here's my warning against it. I think it's twofold. So the first point is that if it turns out there's a handful of charities that are particularly effective, and then we all donate all of our money to those charities, or all of our fundraising efforts to those charities, well, now it looks like there's thousands of potentially worthy causes that aren't going to get anything. And then you just have a problem of having too much money in one place, and when really you want that money to be spread around. So that looks like one problem. And the second is that some people cost a lot of money to help. So it can be really difficult to get help in certain ways. It can be very difficult to support some people. So my concern would be that if you focus too strictly on what costs are, you might ignore some really worthwhile causes. So this is just my view. My personal view is that it's your money, it's your time. To me, I think it's your choice where you place your effort and where you place your money. A second thing I'd like to raise is this idea. Should we give money in private, or should we shout about it? So it seems kind of counterintuitive, this idea that maybe we should shout about the money that we give or the time that we spend doing something. It's not very modest, and modesty seems to be a value that we respect. But actually, I'm going to say, counterintuitive as it is, I think we should shout about it. And the reason for that is that when you talk about something that you support and you give your reasons for supporting it, you might encourage other people either to support your charity or to do more for a cause that they care about. So, yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but I do think that that is a great way to help to increase the amount that we all give to various charities. Okay, and here's the final worry, I guess. I felt this, I'm sure you have yourself sometimes. sometimes causes are just so huge. You might feel that as an individual, you make no difference whatsoever. And in those times, you might think, I'm just a little drop in the ocean. What's the point of me doing anything? So I think the answer to that is that you shouldn't expect to be more than a drop in the ocean. So what we need to be is that each one of us is a drop in the ocean, and that collectively that adds up. So I think don't feel that you make no difference for that reason. And I think that there's a second reason, which is depending on the kind of thing that you do, you can sometimes have enormous impact even as an individual. So I have a friend, I call him Chili Phil, and he makes vegan chili for the homeless. Actually, we kind of chip in and we all make some, and he serves it every Thursday evening, and that has enormous benefits to the community, to the homeless community locally. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few thoughts, which is, we've asked what matters most when we give. Is it the effect that we have? Is it our intent, or is it something else? And I've suggested that one thing that might matter is consistency. I've said that if you're a corporate organisation, you should know what your motives are and be able to defend those, and that you can use your expertise and your local knowledge to improve things. And finally, I think that you will protect your reputation if you can be authentic in your choices. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found that helpful. Thanks very much for joining me.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Charlotte. As fascinating as usual. And I never thought giving could be so complicated.
Sorry.
And of course, there's a whole bunch of considerations that goes with the charity or the organisations that's accepting the money as well. So there's some interesting situations, weren't there? For example, in relation to the Royal Ballet and the money they were getting from fossil fuel companies, not long ago. So thank you very much for that. Very interesting indeed.